sometimes when we say seerah, we mean just the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but seerah can be for anybody. And Seerah Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that's the life story of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Before we start talking about any kind of Islamic science, I want to set the groundwork a little bit, okay? Expectations. The first and most important thing that we talk about when we talk about any kind of expectation or any kind of Islamic science is, where does knowledge come from? Where does knowledge come from? Okay? I'll give you a hint. There are 3 sources of knowledge. Of certain knowledge. 3 sources of certain knowledge. Anybody know what one of the sources of certain knowledge is? Where does knowledge come from? Anybody? There are wrong answers, but I will not make fun of you if you have them. Yes?
Reliable source.
A reliable, okay. Okay, so actually, we're starting off. Well, okay, so number 1 is actually number 2, is reliable source. Also, I have been told my handwriting is chicken scratch. You're gonna have to deal with it. Yes?
Observation.
Observation, good. Also, when you raise your hand, say your name. So I know who to make fun of. Do I know your name? I know your face. Abdullah. That was going to be one of my guesses, but that's because it's very common. All right, what was your answer, by the way?
Observation.
Observation, okay. Observation is good. Observation is good. But what are you using to observe? Your senses, okay? Senses. There's a third. What's the third? You already had your. Somebody else. If preferably a sister, because we already got two bros. Anybody? Going once, going twice? Logic. Right? The mind. For example, mathematics. All of mathematics comes from logical deductions. And this is also divided into 2 parts, but we're not going to get too much into that. Okay, so we have senses, we have reliable sources, we have the mind. Okay? This is the 3 places where knowledge comes from. If I see something, right? Let's take Starbucks as an example. I always like Starbucks as the example to understand what this is like. You see a sign that says Starbucks, all right? What are the chances there's a Starbucks?
100%.
Near 100%, right? That the chances are there's a Starbucks. If you walk in and say, hi, I'm in Kmart, right? There's no correlation between what you saw and what you believed. So you see a sign that says Starbucks, very high chance you're going to be in a Starbucks. How many of us stop and think, does that sign exist? Is it really a Starbucks? Right? What do we say in English? Seeing is? Believing, right? Vast majority of us, when we smell something, we see something, we hear something, we taste something, we touch something, we don't go into an existential crisis about whether or not that thing exists, right? It's only when you really start thinking about it that you're like, but am I the butterfly, right? It's usually like, this is why I like the Starbucks example. You go into a Starbucks, you see something on the menu, you ask them for it, you're like, I would like a latte. And they give you a cappuccino, right? And you taste the cappuccino and you're like, this is a cap. And they're like, no, it's not. It's a latte. No one's going to be like, well, you know, knowledge is uncertain. And perhaps I did ask for a latte, and perhaps I didn't ask for a latte. No one's going to be like that. They'll be like, manager, please. Right? So, senses is your senses are a very strong, what we call ilm daruri. It says an immediate form of knowledge that you don't really question unless you really have to start thinking about it very hard. The other one we're going to go to is the mind, right? So someone says, I'm going to be here at 6 o'clock. And then they show up at 6:15. Okay? You can infer a bunch of things from why they showed up at 6:15. Right? You can infer a lot of these things. It might have been traffic, might have gotten out of bed late, got a call from somebody and had to answer it. There's a lot of things you can infer from this. And this is the kind of knowledge that comes from the mind. Has anybody seen the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Did you hear him? Did you infer from your mind like a geometrical, like mathematics, like a geometrical proof, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No. I'm just going to answer that one for you. No, you didn't. Right? So what does that leave us with? Reliable source. Right? Reliable source is what the vast majority of Muslim knowledge is built on. Knowledge of Islamic sciences. Reliable source. So it's important to demonstrate what reliable source is like. Reliable source is not, I heard a guy who heard a guy who heard a guy who said there's free food in room XYZ. And then you go there and there's no food, right? That's not a reliable source. What does it mean to have a reliable source? What does it mean to have a reliable source? Yes?
Fact check them.
Name?
Background check.
Name?
Name, Catherine.
Catherine?
Yes.
Okay, a fact check. Or background check?
Yeah.
Okay, how many of you have run background checks on your friends? Before you're like, you know what, this is a cool dude. Like Abdullah here, right? I'm like, Abdullah, you seem like a cool dude, but I need you to go to a notary with me so that we can get you background checked. How many of you have done that with your friends? I hope the number is 0. Okay? But we all do background checks our own way. How do you do a background check on one of your dudes? Always.
I feel like the first interaction with them is like a big tell of like, who is this person? But obviously over time, like hanging out with them, spending time with them, picking off like what their thoughts are and stuff like that is like at least a big tell for me to be like, is this someone I want to be around?
Good, right? So just knowing them, right? Not like seeing them once, right? Like, oh, I see you. You seem like a nice person. I'll give you all my money, right? No, knowing the person, right? What's another way we do background checks on people? Just kind of socially. What's your name back there, bro? Taha? All right, go for it.
Seeing who they're friends with, who they hang out with.
Their own circle, right? Their circle, my circle, what's the overlap? Who are the dudes that are in his circle, right? If they're cool people, he's cool by association. That's how coolness works, unfortunately. And so, I get to know him. We like traveled to Minneapolis together for some reason. Maybe we're Vikings fans, God forbid, right? And he hangs around with other cool people. These are very organic ways we do background checks, right? And then when you spend enough time with a person, you have experiences with a person, you know their circles know you. That becomes a reliable source. That becomes a source that now, let's say Abdullah has a lot of those kinds of experiences with Oais. And Oais comes and tells him, I saw with my own eyes that there is free food at the Johnson Center. And now is Abdullah going to believe him? Is Abdullah going to believe him? Yes. But the first time he sees him and he says, there's free food at the JC. Maybe not. Right? But they've gone to Minneapolis together. They suffered through Kirk Cousins throwing 3 interceptions. They came back. They know each other's guys, and each other's guys knows them. And then he comes and he says, there's free food at the JC. This is almost as if Abdullah has seen it himself. Because now he trusts the ways. Okay? This is what we call, in English it's known as social epistemology. Right? In English, we love giving very complicated and technical names for very simple ideas. Right? So what we just called was just, people knowing people. We call it social epistemology. In Arabic, it's known as khabar sadiq. This is a true report. A true report. And then all of the true reports, you have to know, how do we know it's true? How do we know the people, etc., etc. Okay, now why am I giving you this background on where knowledge comes from? Other than the fact that I'm killing time? No. Why am I giving you all this background where knowledge comes from? It's because when we talk about seerah, right, when we talk about any history at all, eventually the history, no matter, you can go, you can read a book of history that is written by a first-hand account of somebody who saw the Mongols burn Baghdad. Okay? First-hand account of somebody who saw the Mongols burn Baghdad. At the end of the day, you're believing his report. At the end of the day, you're going to believe his report. And you're not just believing his report. You're also believing the report of the person who says this book belongs to him. All of history at the end comes from this. All of it comes from reliable source. And this is particularly true when we talk about the seerah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of the seerah comes from reliable sources. Okay? And now here's the tricky part. Not all of the seerah has the same kind of reliable sources as other parts of the seerah. Some parts of the seerah will have reliable sources, very, very reliable. You know for sure this happened because the sources are very reliable. Other parts you're like, nah, maybe. 50-50. But the difference between the way Muslims treat history and people, particularly modern Western history treats history, is if we're not sure whether or not something happened, we don't throw it out. We don't say, nah, this will never be used. We're going to throw it out. Because now we're coming to the second thing that we're going to talk about before we actually get into the meat and potatoes, which is ambiguity. All right, ambiguity. Somebody comes to you and you say, what's your name, bro?
Hermit.
Arman?
Hermit.
Hermit. Ahmad.
Yeah. Okay,
sorry. I don't know why I registered that. I was like, man, this must be a very rare name. Okay. Omar, somebody comes to Omar and asks him, what's 1 + 1? And Omar goes, could be 2. Some say it's 3. And a third opinion that is 5. But really, in my estimation, the opinion, it's 2. This would be a nonsensical answer, right? Nonsensical answer. Why is it a nonsensical answer? Because we don't like the idea as modern peoples as not knowing exactly what the answer is. If somebody comes and asks you about, let's say, the Battle of Britain. Anybody know what Battle of Britain is?
It's the German air campaign against the United Kingdom.
Yes, exactly. It was the German air campaign against the United Kingdom, okay? And they ask you, let's say, how many German planes were used in the Battle of Britain? Okay? If you put that question into Google, and Google was like, there are 5 opinions, it would be very frustrating. Like, Google, just tell me the answer. But that's not how, for the vast majority of history, Muslims have treated their knowledge. All right, quick water break. That's not how, for the vast majority of history, Muslims have treated their knowledge. Muslims preserve everything. This is the most important thing to know about Muslim knowledge. We preserve everything. Even things we think are complete nonsense. We're like, somebody should write this down. So you will find things in Muslim books where like the scholars wrote stuff down and none of them believed it. It's complete nonsense, but it's still there. Because Muslims preserve everything. Our idea of preservation is not saying this is the correct opinion, 100%, and everything else should be deleted. Our idea of preservation is write it all down. Collect as many reports, write it all down. We'll sift through it later. This is our idea of preservation. Okay? So, when was the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam born? What was the name of the year he was born? Anybody know? Am al-Fil. Okay. Now, did you know there are 5 different opinions on what exactly Am al-Fil means? Some of them say it was 40 years before he was born. And some of them say it was the year he was born. And some of them say it was about 15 to 20 years before he was born. And the opinions go on and on. Now, which one is right? The answer is all of them. And maybe not. Okay? Because nobody can go back and say, you know what? It was the year he was born. It was 40 years before he was born. But what do all of them agree on? That the story of the elephants happened, and it was a precursor to his birth. The exact number of years before, disagreement. But they all agree on the general events. Why is this important? Because there are going to be many stories of the Seerah where details are disagreed on, the chronology is disagreed on, and I don't want you to feel, right? Some of you are going to be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go read a book of Seerah. And then you go read it and you're like, but this one is different from this one, which is different from this one. And it's because when the scholars write for the average person, when it comes to Am al-Fil, they just take whichever opinion they think is strongest and they say, this is what happened. All right, this is what happened, this is how it happened, this is when it happened. But then when they go back to their own guys to debate about this stuff, right? It's not like, you know, this is exactly what happened, and if you don't believe in it, you're not Muslim. There are very few stories in Seerah like that. The vast majority of them have multiple opinions. And being comfortable with the fact that there's a lot of opinions is part of Islam. Because what we're saying is, as long as the opinion is sourced in a reliable source, write it down. Write it down. We'll sift through it later. And that's fine. And you will find this attitude in fiqh, you will find this attitude in seerah, you will find this attitude in hadith, you will find this attitude in history, you will find this attitude in Quran, you will find this attitude in everything. Because the way Muslims preserve is different from how we imagine preservation today. The way you imagine preservation today is factories. That there is a factory of knowledge. The knowledge goes in, and every single book looks exactly like every other book. And there's no deviation. That's how we imagine preservation. This is not how Muslims imagine preservation. Muslims imagine preservation by saying there are 1,000 opinions and 1,000 narrations. Just write them all down. Write them all of them down. And as long as they're all written, we've preserved it. This is what preservation means to Muslims. There's more to say, but I was late, so I shall not. Okay. Ali tells me that the best way to start is from the end. And it's not a bad way of starting. So what we're actually going to start with, we're not going to start with the beginning, right? We're going to do one of those movies where, like, you go to the end, and then there's a freeze frame. It goes, "You're wondering how we got here." So what is the end of the seerah look like? The end of the seerah is a very powerful and very emotional moment for the entirety of the ummah at the time. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam becomes immensely sick, and he suffers in that sickness for some say a few weeks, some say a few days. And the sickness becomes so much that he can't even stand up and pray. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when he was lying in the lap of his wife, she couldn't place a hand over his head because of how hot it had become from the fever. There's a certain amount of, we sometimes imagine, or it can be easy to imagine, that the more Allah loves you, the easier life gets. And the correlation, the logic of this is very simple. God is all powerful. God loves me. You do nice things for people you love. Right? At least that's what my mom tells me. Alright, I'm not gonna write the last, right? You do nice things for people that you love. Therefore, give me the last one. Therefore,
God will do nice things for me.
God will do nice things for me because He loves me. Right? This is a very simple logic that we don't even realize that we've internalized until we get hit by a truck. Inshallah, metaphorically. Okay? Like you're going by life is all nice, then you get hit by a truck. Someone dies, you lose your job, you don't get the job. You want to marry somebody, you can't marry them. Right? You get hit by a truck. And then you think to yourself, what's the most natural thing that one of us will think to ourselves when that happens? Why is God doing this to me? This is the most natural thing that people think to themselves. Why is God doing this to me? Because it's coming out of this logic. Coming out of this logic. God is all powerful. God loves me. You do nice things for people you love. God must do nice things for me. It's coming out of this very simple logic. And one of the most powerful things to do when you're reading Seerah is to look at all of the ways in which the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was tested continuously, again and again and again and again. What is the worst thing that can happen to somebody? Worst thing.
Yeah, let somebody.
Death. Right? someone dies. So non-existence. Worst thing that can happen, right, in our imagination. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran? إِنَّكَ مَيِّتٌ وَإِنَّهُمْ مَيِّتُونَ. You are, it's not you will die, you are dead. In that it's so imminent, so close. You are dead, and they are dead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is already telling the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he's going to die. He's already telling him sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he's going to die, even though he is the most beloved person to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the greatest of creations. He's the most beloved of creations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is already telling him you're going to die. One of the most powerful things you can do reading the Seerah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to break this logic. To break this logic. That Allah is all powerful and you do good things for people that you love, therefore God must do good things for me if He loves me. Because what you end up with when you break that idea, right? There is another idea that undergirds, that supports, that holds up this idea. And that idea is that life, that's an either, life is lived for life. There's an idea that undergirds this entire idea. That life is lived for life itself. Because if once you believe this, the rest of this makes sense. This logic makes sense. Because if life is lived for life itself, then God has to do good things for me in this life. If the meaning of life is this life, if all of the meaning for living is found in this life, then God must do nice things for me in this life if He loves me and He's all powerful. And the way you break that, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so feverish that when he tried to stand in prayer, he could not stand. And this was after he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he buried all of his children. Each and every one of his children died in his own life. Except for one. Who was that? Fatima radiallahu anha. Right, his most beloved daughter. And what does he tell her right before he's about to die? He's dying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the last time she comes to visit him. And he brings her close. And he whispers something into her ear, and she starts crying. And then he whispers something else into her ear, and she starts laughing. And later, they ask her, Ya Fatima, what did he say to you? Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And she said, the first thing he said was, I am going to die very soon. And she started crying. She said, the second thing he said was, you will be the first amongst my family to join me. And so I became happy. But think about what he's saying to her. That even after I die, I buried all my children. All of them. And right after I die, my last child is going to die too. This is what he's saying. And this makes little sense. This makes little sense if we believe that God being all powerful, when He loves me, has to do good things for me. in this life. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he finally passed away, they wrapped him in a white cloth and they buried him. Before that, actually, it's a very powerful story. There is a man, he went to the front of the people and he said, if I have anything, if there is anyone whom I have harmed, come and take it from me now. If I ever hit you, come and hit me back, because I don't want this to go with me when I meet my Lord. As the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. So a man stood up and he said, Ya Rasulullah, we were walking once and you pushed me. So he said, come and take it from me. And so he goes to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he just grabs him. This is his excuse. He knows this is the last time he's ever going to touch the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so he grabs him and he embraces him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Sahaba have no idea how they're going to deal with the passing of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's hard for us to imagine what the implication of his passing is going to be. You know, Umar radiallahu anhu, he was once sitting in a corner of the room and he burst into tears. And they asked him, Ya Umar, why are you crying? And he said, before Islam, I had a daughter. And I buried her alive. Because the Arabs were so ashamed of having girls that if a daughter was born, there was a high chance they would bury them alive. And he said, as I was burying her alive, some of the dirt got in my beard. And she reached out with her hand and she hit it off. And Umar he's just completely mortified by what he did before Islam. And we talk about misogyny, right? We talk about hating women. This is misogyny at a level that it's hard to imagine. The Quran describes it as when someone is given good news by what Allah has blessed them, a darkness overtakes their face. They become very agitated, angry. They wish that they were far away from their people because of the sadness they're getting, of the good news that they've gotten. They wish they're mixed into the dirt. This is how they feel. Why? Because they had a child and that child was a dog. This same Umar radiallahu anhu, because of following the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam for 20 years, this same Umar radiallahu anhu, he made a school in Medina. And this is where some of the greatest Sahaba were educated. Who was the teacher of the school? Where he put his own son and had him taught from a very small age, Abdullah ibn Umar, until he became one of the greatest scholars of Islam. Who was the teacher of that school? It was Aisha radiallahu anha. He went from devaluing women to the point where he was burying his own daughter alive, to leaving his most beloved son in the care of Aisha radiallahu anha. And the person who transformed him entirely from one to the other, the person who transformed him entirely, he knows he's about to die. Medina is in a complete and absolute mess. No one knows how anything is going to happen from now on. When somebody had a dispute, who did they go to? Who did they go to? The Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. When someone had good news, who did they go to? The Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. When they had bad news, who did they go to? When they wanted dua to be made, who did they go to? When they wanted to discuss something in the political, who did they go to? When they wanted to discuss something happening in their family, who did they go to? The whole city, all of Arabia at that point revolved around the person of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And he was lying in the lap of Aisha radiallahu anha, and everybody knew he was about to die. And when he finally took his last breath, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Umar radiallahu anhu went in front of everybody and he said, anybody who says that he is past, he is dead, anybody who says that, I'm gonna chop your head off. Umar, very boisterous character. A quick story about Umar. So at some point, the Muslims leave Mecca and go to Medina. It's called the Hijrah. And they leave Mecca, they go to Medina. Because the Meccans were persecuting them, they were getting to the point of killing them, etc. Everybody, they were very scared that if people found out, they would grab them, keep them, not let them go, or they would kill them. So they all left very secretly at night, including the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Left very secretly at night. Except for Umar radiallahu anhu. He grabbed all his stuff, put it on his camels, in the middle of the day starts marching out from the main gates. And he turns around and he says, anybody who wants to make his wife and mother cry, try to stop. Umar radiallahu anhu was the type of person, his physical stature, when he sat on a horse, his feet would touch the ground. Umar radiallahu anhu was the most dynamic and just boisterous person in all of Medina. He gets up, right? This man goes to the front of everybody and says, anybody who says that the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is passed, I'm going to chop his head off. And one of the Sahaba gets up, and there's two narrations. One says Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and the other one says Hassan bin Thabit radiallahu anhu. And they say, whoever worshipped Muhammad, know that he is dead. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Innahu qad mat. And anybody who worships Allah, know that he is alive and he will never die. And there's an ayah in the Quran that talks about this too. There was a moment in the Battle of Uhud when people thought the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had died. And the ayah in the Quran says, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. That the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is not but a man. And before him, many prophets have perished. This is a moment of complete despondence. Everybody is deeply disquiet. There's, interestingly, a lot of words for sorrow begins with D in English for some reason. Depressed, disquiet, discomfort, despondent. For some reason, it's just English doesn't like D. It's a letter of sorrow in English. But the mood in Medina is such that on one hand, there's a lot of sorrow, and on the other hand, there's a lot of urgency, because this is something that we're going to get into over the next few sessions, inshallah. We are the only major religion in the world where our founder, we shouldn't say founder, but our most important figure, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was not just a holy man. Okay, you have figures where like the major figure sits under a tree and makes so much dhikr that he becomes part of the tree. Right? This is not the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You have world religions where the person who is the most important or the founder of that religion only does religious ministry, and the moment the state becomes scared of him, they try to get rid of him. We are the only religion where our founder has taught us the perfect way of dealing in every part of life. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us how to pray with perfection. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us how to be a spouse with perfection. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us how to struggle against tyranny and oppression with perfection. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us how to be statesmen and stateswomen with perfection. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us how to give a khutbah with perfection. There is no part of life that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not teach us how to do with perfection. There is no part of human endeavor. And this is really one of the signs of Allah with the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Because Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. That for you in the person of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the perfect model. The perfect model. And when he subhanahu wa ta'ala said that, he then made the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam a perfect model in every human endeavor. In every human endeavor. Which means that it's not just the spiritual, but all of what we would like to consider the temporal, the worldly. He is also, like, for example, how did the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam get married? Because he was really good at business. That's how the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam got married. He was really good at business. And how did the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam unite the Arab tribes? Because he was really good at war. And how did the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam make dua? Because he was really good at praying. And how did his wives love him so much? Because he was really good at being a husband. That's why we say sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Every human endeavor. And so now let's go back to Medina at the moment that he's passed. Everything revolved around him. Everything was, he was the one who was managing all of it because he was perfect at all of it. And now, suddenly, he's gone. He's gone. The political leader is gone. The judge is gone. The person who makes friends or who brings people together is gone. The social leader is gone. And for some of the Sahaba, the friend is gone. And this is where there is a series of very tumultuous occasions that take place. But what we have to realize, there's a lesson in here. I almost dropped it. There's a lesson in here that is very important. And before we jump back to the beginning, we're going to keep with this lesson a little bit. And that is, how you're lived is how you're remembered. What the way that you live in your life, what you do in your life, is what people are going to think about you, how their lives are going to be affected when you're gone. So the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam lived the perfect life. And everybody that was around him, Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, أَوَ مَنْ كَانَ مَيْتًا فَأَحْيَيْنَاهُ وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ فِي النَّاسِ كَمَنْ مَثَلُهُ فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ. What about the one who was dead? Somebody who was dead. And we brought him back to life. And we gave him a light by which to walk, or with which to walk around amongst people. Is he like the one who was trapped in darkness, never coming out of it? Eternal darkness. The Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the perfect light. If the average Muslim, if the average mu'min with good character and strong belief is a light of Allah, then the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the perfect light. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes him as such too. He says, قَدْ جَاءَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ نُورٌ وَكِتَابٌ مُبِينٌ. That has come to you, what has come to you from Allah is light and a clear book. And the light is in reference to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. نُورٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَكِتَابٌ مُبِينٌ يَهْدِي بِهِ اللَّهُ مَنِ اتَّبَعَ رِضْوَانَهُ سُبُلَ السَّلَامِ. So, the way that he lived his life, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, was as a light in people's lives. And when he was gone, it was as if the light had been extinguished. Think about yourselves and your roles in the lives of people around you. Are you a light in the lives of people? How many people? You can close your eyes, you can think about this right now and you'll know right off the top of your back. How many people, if you were gone, would be like, it's like as if a light has been extinguished from my life. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a perfect light. And so when he passed, everybody said, light has gone from my life. Now, none of us are going to be like the light of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. None of us is going to be a perfect light. But what we want from our lives is that the people who are around us, when we pass, they say it is like a light has gone out from our lives. So now, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he's eventually placed in his grave, right? And people are jumping in just to kiss him. They're jumping into the grave just to give him a kiss so they can have one last moment with him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he is put into the grave and buried in the small little flat of Aisha radiallahu anha, it is a culmination of a life. That moment, the way that everyone is reacting, the way that everyone has no idea what to do, the way that there's emotional turmoil, that's a culmination of a life of perfection. And what we're going to do is we're going to take snippets, not the whole thing, because we only got 4 sessions after this one, so 5 in total. We only got 4 sessions. We're going to do snippets. I think the more polite term is portraits. We're going to take portraits from the life of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we're going to look at them from the perspective not just of who he was sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but our overall goal is going to be to understand the seerah from the terms of the ayah we recited before. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. For you in the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is a beautiful, a wonderful, perfect model, example for you to follow. So when we talk about when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was shunned from his family, boycotted from his city, kept from buying food, kept from talking to anybody, and he had to leave his own city and go to its outskirts, where he and the Sahaba were boiling leather for dinner. We're not just going to look at it from the perspective of the struggle of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're going to look at it from the perspective of how do we deal with difficulty and hardship and hate. How do we deal with difficulty in our own lives and hate that comes from other people? When we read about the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his own people throwing him out of his city, trying to kill him, how do we deal ourselves with loss and sorrow? How do we take his example on what it's like to deal with losing what it is we love most? You know what, when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is leaving Mecca, he stands outside of it and he turns around and he looks at it. This is his city. He loves his city. And he says, by Allah, if my people did not throw me out of it, I would never have left you. And in response to that moment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals in the Quran, إِنَّ الَّذِي فَرَضَ عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لَرَادُّكَ إِلَى مَعَادٍ. Indeed, the one who made it obligatory on you to give this Quran, to spread this Quran, the one who gave you the Quran will bring you back to the place that you love most. So how do we deal with hardship? We take that from the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then in the end, when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam marches into Mecca, these people who cursed him, fought him, tried to kill him, tried to destroy him, maligned him, and he walks into them as the victor, the general of the army that's conquered their city. We are going to learn forgiveness. We are going to learn how to treat people who've wronged you. We're going to learn how to be the better person. So in all of the portraits of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're not just going to look at them from the perspective of, this is what happened, this is how it happened. We're going to look at it from the perspective of how is he sallallahu alaihi wasallam the most perfect, the most beautiful, the most wonderful example for us in how we live our own lives. And the goal of it is in the end, the ayah of the Quran that we recited before, to bring our hearts back to life with the love of Allah and His Messenger, and to be lights in the lives of people around us. So that when people look at us, they see the light of Allah being placed into their lives.
What was the last thing that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said?
What was the last thing he said?
Yes.
Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan rasulullah. Well, not the last part, but still, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.
More specifically, what was the last thing he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about women?
About women? The last thing he said about women. I was actually thinking about whether I should do this in this session or the last session. Not the women thing. But the first session or the last session, and that was the khutbah al-wada' at the khutbah in Yawm al-Arafah and Hajj al-Wada'. And that is the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam made one Hajj after Islam. He made one Hajj. And that was the final year when he was going to pass sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And during that Hajj, so every Hajj has, you go to Arafah, Mount Arafah, and at Arafah, you hear a khutbah. Okay? That khutbah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is something every Muslim should read. It is his final major, because this was the largest Hajj that had ever been done, right? Because this was the Hajj of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was the largest Hajj that was done up to that point, and from that point onwards for a while. There were about 100,000 people that came to that Hajj. You can imagine 100,000 people in 600 CE Arabia. That's a lot of people. And so he gave a khutbah, which is basically his last advice that he wants people to hear. Right? His last advice that he wants people to hear before he's going to pass. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every person should read that, and we're going to talk more about it, inshallah, in our final session. And that has a section in it that's specifically about women. It's actually really interesting. One of the things very fascinating is when the Quran talks about women, or the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam talks about women, vast majority of the time, who is he talking to? Vast majority of the time, who is he talking to? The men. Vast majority of the time talking to men. Why? Why is it when the vast majority of the time that something is said about women, it's said to men?
It's so, I guess, men understand, right, maybe the needs of the wife, the needs of women, so maybe protection.
Because, yeah, it's because, I mean, you can ask any woman this, what's the most difficult thing she has to deal with? It's the men. And so, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking to the guys, right? In that same way. So there's a very famous hadith that gets taken in all the wrong ways for whatever reason, where the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that don't. He's talking to men, and he says don't try to change your wives because they were made from a rib that is in a bent shape of Adam alayhi salam. Don't try to straighten it, you'll break it. And everybody's like, oh, that means women are like, women are messed up just coming out of it, and if we try to make them right, we'll break them. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is that what is normal in your shape and what is normal in their shape is different. If you try to turn a woman into a man, she won't be a woman anymore. And it will be abusive. So don't do it. Right? These are many warnings that are given to men, right? Because the primary difficulties that women have to deal with comes usually from the men. If that's just the way it is, and that's something that. So even in that khutbah, there's a section on women, and it's all addressed to the men, even though there were women there.
Okay. What are the correct etiquette/manners of debate and disagreement in Islam?
Preferably swords. But if you want to use blunt objects, you can use a mace. there's an ayah in the Quran, إنما المؤمنون إخوة فأصلحوا بين أخويكم واتقوا الله, that believers are a fraternity of brothers and sisters, right? We're all brothers and sisters to each other, and so make peace between your brothers and have taqwa of Allah. The most important thing to remember always when you're debating. Imam al-Shafi'i, one of the greatest scholars of Islam, even though I'm not a Shafi'i, Hanafi power. But Imam al-Shafi'i, he said, I never debated a person except I wished that the truth would come out of his mouth. Because the goal of a debate is not to be right. It is to find the truth. And as long as you are convinced that the truth is yours, as long as you feel like you're playing home field advantage on the truth, right? That the truth is yours and the other person is dead wrong and I have to convince them, then you're just going to go completely out of bounds. But if you feel that there is a truth that we are both trying to find, and you're doing that together in an intellectual exercise, then naturally you'll find the right balance in debate between trying to push back on ideas to hone things, and maintaining your etiquette and your boundaries. The most important person you need to have boundaries is with yourself. You need to make boundaries with yourself. And one of the boundaries you have with yourself always is that no matter what happens, I am not going to allow myself, I'm going to have a boundary with myself and my anger. And whenever I start getting frustrated and angry, I'm just going to remove myself from the situation. The Rasul, a man came to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, give me advice. He said, don't get angry. He said, give me advice. He said, don't get angry. He said, give me advice. He said, don't get angry. And that doesn't mean that all anger is bad. It just means that anger is the type of thing that's explosive and it can get out of hand. So that's probably the most important thing for debate.
Do some Islamic rulings change based on the time period?
Yes, of course. This is a basic understanding of fatwa. When you give fatwa, I'll give you 3 examples right off the bat. Okay. Is it sunnah to complete the Quran during Taraweeh? Is it sunnah to complete the Quran during Taraweeh? The answer is yes. It is sunnah to complete the Quran during Taraweeh. But do any scholars recommend completing the Quran in Taraweeh if the people can't do it? No. Everybody says it's better for you not to complete the Quran during Taraweeh if the people can't do it. Why? Because, and by people can't do it, I mean like they got work at 9 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, and they got to get up at like 5, right? And Isha's at 10:15, right? So unless you're going Speedy Gonzales on the Quran, right? You're not doing it. So does anybody recommend that you're like, no, we're going to start Taraweeh at 10:30, and we're going to finish it at 1, and if you don't like it, then you have weak iman? No, nobody recommends it. This was a very important question that started early, which was, can you take money to teach Quran? And this was a question that started almost 300 years after the Risala of the Rasul. And the base ruling is, it is impermissible to take money in order to do a worship. So if somebody says, please pray for me, I will pay you. It's impermissible. You can't take money for worship. Is teaching Quran worship? Is it ibadah? Yes, teaching Quran is ibadah. Can you take money for it? Based on the principle, if you cannot take money for worship, can you take it? No, it would be haram. Unanimously, the scholars agree it's permissible. Why? Because they say that time has become such that if people don't take money to teach Quran, right, because of the economic circumstances, things like that, and because there's just not enough people specialized in Quran, that people won't learn it. Right? If you tell every person who specializes in Quran that you have to do it on your off time, nights and weekends, right? Very few people will actually be able to dedicate very little amount of time, and there's a lot of Muslims. MashaAllah, a lot of Muslims, right? So people just won't learn Quran. And so you have to have certain people whose job it is to teach Quran. Otherwise, people will just not learn Quran. And so, unanimously, people change their opinion on this ruling, and it becomes permissible to take money to teach Quran. So, does time and place affect a ruling? Absolutely. Circumstance? Absolutely. Does it affect every ruling? Absolutely no. How do you know? There's a long tradition in systemizing this type of stuff. And that's why we need scholars. Scholars who are trained in the entire methodology that can give fatwa based on time and place, without going completely loosey-goosey.
How do we give da'wah to non-Muslim family members and friends?
You know that Jordan Peterson video, The Message to Muslims?
Yeah.
Just send him that. Oh no, even better, Dan Haqiqatju. Send him a bunch of Dan Haqiqatju videos. This is a very difficult question. There's a very interesting historical figure named Saint Francis of Assisi. Was obviously not Muslim, but he has a very famous quote that I think is very very useful here. It says, he said, "Preach the gospel at all times. Use words if necessary." And I think that has a lot of resonance in our own tradition as well. The Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, "Innama bu'ithtu li'utammima makarim al-akhlaq." I was only sent to perfect good character. You can say all the right things to all the right people, but if you are a terrible person, no one's going to listen to you. If you are the person who is causing all the grief in everyone's life, no one's going to listen to you. The first thing, if you want to give da'wah to your family, is to perfect your character. If you have good character, right? 2 steps. 1, good character, where everybody sees you, knows you as the person who has the best character in the family. And second, you are involved deeply in the hurts, the sorrows, the griefs, the hardships, the difficulties of each one of your family members. Everybody knows they can turn to you. And then, when they're in those griefs and sorrows and difficulties and they're relying on you, make them rely on Allah as well. Tell them to make dua, and that you are making dua for them, and really sincerely make dua for them. And if they see you as a beautiful person who loves them, is committed to their needs, and that Allah is helping them through you, the rest is up to Allah.
What is the core trait of a thriving Muslim community, and how can we bring that into our smaller masajid and gatherings?
Love. I hate to sound very, eat, pray, love, right? I hate to sound like Oprah Winfrey. But the most important thing that Muslims can have for each other is a deep sense of love for each other. And not in a, not in like a upper middle class, waspy, it's all about love, But what does love actually mean? What does love actually mean? Love has duties. Love has responsibilities. We sometimes like to, when we say love, we feel like what we're talking about is like the kind of fluffy feeling you get when the joy, right, the fluffiness of joy that you get when you see somebody, it's like, if you have that, everything will be, no, that's nonsense. Love is a very painful feeling. Because what love means is that when somebody that you love is suffering, you are suffering with them. And when somebody you love has pain, you have pain with them. And when somebody you love has immense amount of stress, you have stress with them. Love is very painful. Love has responsibilities and love has duties. One of the duties of love is that when you love somebody, you are involved in all of their hardships. And when they love you, it's the same. They're involved in all your hardships. So when I say that the most important thing for a Muslim community to have is love, what I mean is not that everybody's like all happy and, oh, I love you. That's not what I mean. What I mean is for them to be deeply entangled with each other's lives, feeling the responsibility, feeling the duty that love brings with it. And if you have that, you have a thriving community.
What sources do you recommend for beginners to read and learn more about the Seerah?
The Seerah? 2 books. So one is very dry. Imagine the driest Thanksgiving turkey you've ever had. Okay? That dry. And believe me, when turkey gets dry, oh my God, it's dry. Right? And that one is a sealed nectar. But it is one of the best because it is so dry. There is no fluff whatsoever. It's just like this happened on this date, and this happened on this date, and this happened on this date, and this happened on this date, right? It's like an encyclopedia entry for different parts of the Seerah. That's a perfect book to go to. The other one is the exact opposite. It's all emotion. Some of the emotion is kind of overboard, but still, it's all emotion. And that's Martin Ling's Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his life according to the earliest sources. Beautiful prose. Some of it, you're like, you just wrote this because it sounds nice, right? But it's beautiful prose. It's great narration, wonderful storytelling. Read one with the other, and you will know where Martin Ling's is going excessive, where he's kind of, being a bit loosey-goosey. And you will know that because of what's in the sealed nectar itself. But Martin Ling's will give you something the sealed nectar won't, and that is the emotion attached to the Seerah. And that's very important. Okay.
We'll do 2 more questions and then launch. How did the Prophet ﷺ treat his wives?
Well, the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said to the Sahaba, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ. That the best of you is the best to his wives. Ahl literally means family, but in Arabic, ahl is a euphemism for wife. So خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ. So the best of you is the best to his wife, and I am the best of you to his wife. And the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was, if you read the interactions between him and Khadija radiallahu anha, or him and Aisha radiallahu anha, you'd be like, wow, he's real romantic. Like the Sahaba knew that the day that he was supposed to see Aisha radiallahu anha was the day he was happiest. And so whenever they wanted to ask him for something, they would ask him on that day. One time, Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anhu, who was very close to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came back. He had just been sent on a trip for something, and he came back and he was like, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very proud of me, very happy with me. He has to love me as like more than anybody else. So he asked him in front of everybody. He said, "Who's the most beloved person to you, Ya Rasulullah?" He said, "Aisha." And he said, "Okay, from the men." I lost there, but like, from the men. He says, "Her father." Aisha anha, and one time Aisha anha he was standing by the window and the sun shone on his face. And she was overwhelmed by the beauty of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so she said to him, the poet was right when the poet was talking about you when he described, and then she recited a poem. I can't remember it right off the top of my head, but she recited a poem about how the beloved shines in the sun. And so he went and he kissed her and he said, Ya Aisha, you are like this to me and more. When you read his interactions with him and his wives, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, really the perfect husband, the perfect.
Where do you read this?
Where you الشمائل الشمائل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم by Imam Tirmidhi. The Shama'il Imam Tirmidhi. That's one. There's a lot of like these different small little books that are, but the Shama'il are some of the best. It's like little snippets. Some of it is like, this is the armor of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he had 3 pieces of armor and 2 swords, and each sword's name. And some of it is like that, and you're like, okay, you can just skip those if you want to. But much of it is also this kind of.
Okay. All right, so we'll actually do 2 more after this. How should we deal with grief and sorrow?
Read Surah Yusuf. How should we deal with grief and sorrow? That's an entirely different, like that's a whole lecture. That's a whole lecture. But a couple of points. There's this one particular passage in Surah Yusuf that's most powerful to me, and this is when so Yusuf alayhi salam has been lost for decades now in the story, and Binyamin has just who's the youngest son has now also been lost. And so when they lose Yusuf alayhi salam and they lose Binyamin, who was in the care of all the other brothers, the eldest brother's like, look, I told my dad I wasn't going to lose the youngest one, but now I've lost him. So I'm going to stay behind until Binyamin comes to. And so now when they go back to Yaqub alayhi salam, they've lost Yusuf, they've lost Binyamin, and they've lost the eldest brother. 3 sons Yaqub alayhi salam has lost. 3 sons now. And his sons come to him and they're like, we don't know what to tell you. This is one of the most powerful passages for sorrow and grief in the Quran. Yaqub alayhi salam turns around. It says, وَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ. He turns away from them. وَقَالَ يَا أَسَفَ عَلَى يُوسُف. How great my sorrow for Yusuf. وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. That his eyes go white from the sorrow, and he becomes incredibly melancholy, despondent, right, with these again. And his sons become kind of upset. They're like, you're always going to remember Yusuf. What's wrong? You're going to like destroy yourself remembering Yusuf. And Yaqub alayhi salam turns around to them. He still wasn't talking to you. Why are you jumping into this? Wasn't talking to you. He says, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. That I am complaining of my sorrow and my grief to Allah. وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And I know of Allah what you don't know. This section in the Quran, it's the fourth last page of Surah Yusuf. Okay? Go read that section. Feeling sorrow, grief, hopelessness even, is not against Islam. If Yaqub alayhi salam's eyes can go white, your eyes can go white. Feeling overwhelmed by emotion is not lack of Iman. The question is, who do you complain to? Do you complain to everybody who will hear you when you are as you are desperate, or do you turn to Allah? And you can lose hope in people, you can lose hope in yourself. Don't lose hope in Allah. That's the kind of nutshell, but that requires like a lot more.
Okay, last question. what is your best advice for Muslim youth at GMU?
Wow. I don't know you. I don't know what you're like. I'm doing my PhD at Georgetown, and the kids there are very different from the kids here, right? I'm sorry I call you all kids, but like you were born after 9/11, like you're kids. But like the kids here are very different from the kids there. And if I go to like, I don't know, West Virginia University or something, West Virginia State, they'd be very different there, right? I'm sure they'd have to sing the song, like just the entrance thing. But if I had to give advice to just Muslim youth in general today, the advice I would give them is actually a poem by Muhammad Iqbal, the very famous, very important Indian Muslim nationalist poet. And just two, I'll give you just 2 lines from it, and that'll be my advice to you. He says, Dayar ishq mein apna maqam paida kar, naya zamana nayi subh sham paida kar. He says, in the halls of love of Allah, right? In the realm of love of Allah, give birth to your own name. In other words, add your name to the name of those who love Allah. And when you do that, you will give birth to new mornings and new nights. If you are dissatisfied with the way the world is, if you are dissatisfied with the way your life is, if you're dissatisfied with the now and you want a better future, love Allah. If you want a better future, love Allah, and through you Allah will give birth to a new tomorrow. And then the last line is the one that finishes it. It says, Mera tariq amiri nahi faqiri hai, khudi na bech, gharibi mein naam paida kar. Says, my path is not wealth, it is the love of Allah. My path is not wealth, it is the love of Allah. Don't sell your self-respect. Don't sell your self-respect. But if you have to choose between selling your self-respect or not, then add your name with the people of poverty. What that basically means is sometimes when you are committed to the love of Allah and you are committed to Allah and His Messenger, you will be asked to sell your principles. And in that moment, that is your moment of self-respect, because your self-respect comes entirely with your attachment to Allah and His Messenger. Allah says in the Quran, أَيَحْسَبُونَ عِنْدَهُمُ الْعِزَّةَ فَإِنَّ الْعِزَّةَ لِلَّهِ جَمِيعًا. Do they think that they have honor? All honor belongs to Allah. So your honor comes from your love of Allah and His Messenger. And if at times you have to if you're asked to choose between selling your principles for any amount of money, don't choose the money. Choose poverty, but don't sell your self-respect. A man can live, or a woman can live on food, on bread and water, but cannot live without their self-respect. And that's the most important.
Okay. Jazakallah khair everybody for attending.